FAS201 students, and welcome to week 3 and your third week of video tutorials. Again, just a reminder, this particular video is geared towards those of you in 201. There's another video for 202 on the playlist for this same idea, the same question of how do I compare and contrast works of art. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Comparing and contrasting visual and literary works of art. For those of you in FAS 201, your final paper and your milestone 1 assignment that leads up to it ask you to look at one visual work of art and one literary work of art. So again, this video is geared to those of you in 201 because we're going to be talking about some literary elements. When you compare and contrast works of art, you want to think about it in two ways. One is that description, and the other is the analysis. We talked about visual description a bit in the last video tutorials from week 2, but just to give you a little bit of an overview, you want to give a general overview and look at the close details. So whatever kind of work of art you're looking at, you want to give your reader a good kind of general idea of what you're looking at, as well as zooming in on some of those close details to help them see it more specifically. You want to kind of imagine that you're presenting a first-time viewing or reading to your reader. So even though you know your instructor has looked at these works of art and your classmates have too, you want to kind of ignore that for a little while and pretend you're presenting them with something that they are looking at for the first time. That'll help you get to the point where you really are giving a good full description. At first it might seem kind of silly because you know everybody in your class could be looking at that same work, but when you suspend that idea for a moment, you can do a more effective visual description and formal analysis that way. You want to use a variety of viewpoints and perspectives. So for a visual work of art, of course, that means different angles or maybe close-up images or zooming in on details. And for a literary work of art, that means, again, looking at the work as a whole, as well as zooming in on particular lines or words or imagery that you can find in the text. So you've done your visual description or your literary description, and then you want to move into your analysis to help compare and contrast. The analysis part lays the groundwork for that comparison and contrast, and it helps you to identify some of those thematic connections. So why it is you're comparing these two works of art in the first place, what it is that they have in common, what's that theme that they share. And in this part, you want to have a subjective and an objective analysis. So you want to have, of course, you're going to have some personal or more individual reflections on a work of art because we're looking at artistic creations. So some things might be there that jump out at you more than they might to another individual, but you want to balance that with an objective analysis too by bringing in specific details. So I want to look at a couple of examples to kind of explain what we're talking about here in this two-part process. So let's say for FAS 201 I wanted to talk about a visual work of art that refers back to the ancient Greek period, and I'm looking at this vase from the Attic period, and I'm going to compare this with a literary piece in just a moment. But to focus on the visual work, let's say I want to do my visual description, and I want to have that first viewing description. So I would point out that it's a red figure vase that has black background and red figure details, decorative, geometric, and key details. One of the registers, one of the lines or kind of sections of the vase, features two primary figures. We have Achilles and Hector from the battles in the Iliad. We see shields, spears, helmets, and focus on the human figures. We might zoom in to have that multiple perspective that I was talking about before. So we zoom into that one register that I was referring to where we can see Achilles on the left and Hector on the right. And the goddess Athena is on the far left behind that figure of Achilles. So I've done my visual analysis of it, my visual description of it. Now I want to move into my analysis of it. So my subjective analysis might be my own personal immediate reaction. So some things I notice that figure of Achilles is leaning forward with his shield ahead of him and his weight is planted on his left foot, while Hector on the other side is falling backwards and his shield is behind him. And this sort of stance, the difference between their stances, suggests to me a victor and a defeated in just the way I look at it here, like who's winning and who might be losing this particular battle. And another element I might notice is that Athena is there behind Achilles. That makes me wonder, why would she be there? Is that suggesting that the gods are on his side by some chance? The objective analysis is where I bring in my research and my deeper understanding of the work of art. So the information I know about the classical Greek era and the sense of style that we can see visually in this work would be something I'd discuss here. The classical Greek interest in mythology and stories of the gods would be another element I'd bring into the analysis. Focusing on that idea of perfection and the classic Greek emphasis on the human body as being perfect, or the human form being perfect. And then, of course, those themes that we see here, the idea of war and battle and immortality within the figure of Achilles. This is going to sort of lay the groundwork for how I'm going to compare this work to my literary piece. So my literary example, let's say I want to compare that Greek vase that we just looked at to the literary work by Homer, and I want to focus on the Iliad. So I want to do that first reading description again, like I did my first viewing description of the visual work. So I'll talk about how it was written, when it was written, how it's the first in a series of 2 epic poems. There was the Iliad and the Odyssey. It was set in an earlier time period than it was actually written, which was in the Mycenaean Greek era. And it focuses on the Trojan War, and there's that central character of Achilles. So this sort of gives my reader an overall view of this work, what this literary piece is, when it was written, what's it about, and then I can go into more detail with those multiple perspectives and look at specific lines or sections from the text. So, for example, I might pull something from Book 1 where they describe the idea of Achilles as rage. Goddess sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderous doom that cost the Achaeans countless losses. If I sort of pinpoint terms and particular words in this section here, I see things like rage, murderous, doomed, great fighter souls, feast for the dogs and the birds, with the will of Zeus moving towards its end. So I can start pulling out details about how we would describe Achilles in the text, that he's this sort of fighter who's in a kind of rage, he's murderous, but at the same time he's doomed, so that makes us consider the other ideas behind him. From Book 22, I might pull out the description of the actual fight between Achilles and Hector, where it talks about Achilles going towards Hector, fast, sure of speed, quickest thing on wings, swooping down on a cringing dove, describing Hector as a cringing dove. The hawk screaming, he's the kind of, Achilles is this sort of hawk. His fury drives him down to break and tear his kill, so Achilles flew at him breakneck in fury. Again, this particular passage and these particular details that I've zoomed in on here can help make some connections to what we were talking about before with my visual work of art. So I want to do my analysis at that point then, and of course my subjective analysis that might be more of a personal reaction. This question of Achilles as being a hero, that he's has this rage behind him, and he's this champion fighter, but at the same time we can also see him as sort of a slave to that fury and a sort of mindless quest for immortality. He was murderous and a great fighter, but he was also doomed. I also think about the glorification of war, whether or not the book really glorifies war with the will of Zeus moving towards its end, or does it condemn the idea of war? Countless losses, many sturdy souls, and that description of the hawk and the dove. What's the perspective on war here? My objective analysis, again, for the literary work comes in with my research. So I can learn more about the ancient Greek interest in man's will and fate and heroism with the research that I do and how it applies in this particular text. The importance of the fact that Homer set the poem in an earlier period in the Bronze Age, and an interest in the role of gods in the lives of men on earth. The question of man's will versus being a pawn of the gods. And again, that theme that sort of links it back to our visual work that we looked at a moment ago in terms of war and battle and immortality. So I look at my 2 works of art, my visual piece first and then my literary piece second, and I look at them one by one at a time, so I get a good, clear description of the first work and then the second work, as well as a good analysis of my first work and my second work, so that I can begin to start doing my comparison and contrast between the 2.